Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of truth, curious minds who yearn to lift the veil of forgotten knowledge, today we gather to explore an enigma that has hovered on the edges of faith and myth alike, the story of Metatron and the question that burns with urgency: why was this radiant figure erased from mainstream religion? I invite you to pause for a moment and consider how often you have been told what to believe, how frequently you have been handed neat packages of doctrine without ever being encouraged to peer beneath their glossy surfaces. In this silence of unasked questions, Metatron's name became a whisper, almost an echo, when once it thundered with power. But let this gathering, this speech, this moment be a signal that you are ready to reclaim your right to wonder. Metatron, known in the Jewish mystical tradition as the scribe of God, the celestial being who recorded every human deed and guarded the secrets of creation, was not always a figure confined to secret texts and hidden scrolls. There was an age when Metatron stood tall among archangels, revered and invoked by sages who believed in a universe far more alive, far more interconnected, than our modern, domesticated religions would have us imagine. Yet over time, as institutions hardened and hierarchies grew rigid, the figure of Metatron became inconvenient, even dangerous, because he represented an unmediated channel between humanity and the divine. He symbolized the astonishing possibility that no priesthood or institution held exclusive rights to revelation. Imagine a world where you could connect to the highest truths without permission or approval. That world terrified those who sought to control faith by simplifying it into rigid formulas. And so Metatron's name was gradually obscured, his stories branded as suspect, his memory folded into the margins of holy texts. But here is where your journey begins, because every time a powerful truth is hidden, it becomes more precious. And when you choose to seek what was suppressed, you are not just learning facts, you are defying a culture of passive acceptance. You are daring to reclaim the expansive vision that Metatron once inspired. This is no small act. It is a declaration that your spirit cannot be caged by orthodoxy, that you refuse to settle for a life of second-hand convictions. The erasure of Metatron from mainstream religion was not simply a matter of theological housekeeping, it was an act that revealed how fragile the gatekeepers of dogma really are when faced with mysteries they cannot fully explain. And isn't that exhilarating? To know that you live in a universe still brimming with unanswered questions and hidden wonders. When you study why Metatron faded from public worship, you also discover something about your own hunger for meaning. You realize that what gets buried often carries the seeds of liberation. For centuries, scholars debated Metatron's origins, tracing them to Enoch, the righteous man who, according to ancient law, ascended to heaven and was transformed. In this metamorphosis, humanity's limitations were overcome. He became a symbol that our finite struggles could be redeemed, that our flawed nature was not a final verdict. To some, this was a promise too radical to tolerate. Because if Metatron, a human elevated to such unimaginable heights, could stand beside the divine throne, then perhaps any of us could. Perhaps no barrier was ultimately insurmountable. This thought was both electrifying and profoundly destabilizing to any hierarchy built on the idea of inherent separation between the divine and the human. So gradually, councils and authorities began to paint his story as peripheral, even suspect, while elevating narratives that place distance between ordinary people and transcendent experience. But hear me now, what others suppressed can become the very spark that ignites your transformation. If you feel a stirring in your chest as you listen to these words, know that it is not random. It is the call of a deeper awareness that has been waiting for you to acknowledge it. The story of Metatron shows that knowledge cannot be erased, it can only be hidden until a generation arrives that is bold enough to reclaim it. You are that generation. You are the seekers who refuse to be anesthetized by convenient half-truths. You are the explorers who will not rest until you have unearthed every luminous fragment buried by fear and control. And as you dig, you are not merely reconstructing the past. You are expanding your understanding of what is possible in the present. The question of why Metatron was erased is also the question of why we allow our lives to shrink into predictable routines, why we surrender our sovereignty to those who pretend to have all the answers. It is the question that challenges you to remember that spiritual curiosity is not a threat, it is a gift. The more you pursue it, the more alive you become. You will find that the courage to investigate this hidden history will awaken something fierce within you, a hunger that no platitude can satisfy. Imagine the scribes who first dared to write down Metatron's story, fully aware that they were documenting something that defied easy classification. Imagine the scholars who risked persecution by copying texts that would be condemned as heretical. Each of them carried a torch of inquiry through the long corridors of time, passing it down until it reached your hands. Now it is your turn to lift it high, to illuminate the shadows that have kept humanity small. Because in the end, the only reason any powerful figure is erased from official histories is that they carry a disruptive potential, a reminder that we are all more than we have been told. Metatron's memory survived because truth is persistent. It survives exile. It survives suppression. It survives the centuries of enforced silence, waiting patiently for those with the courage to listen. Today, you have chosen to become one of those listeners. That choice marks the beginning of an adventure that will change you forever. As you reclaim Metatron's story, you are also reclaiming your own capacity for wonder, your own right to define what is sacred, and your own power to stand in the presence of mysteries too vast to be domesticated by dogma. Consider the audacity it took for early mystics to insist that the divine was not confined to temples or scriptures but could speak directly through figures like Metatron. They believed that revelation was not a relic of the past but an ongoing process, unfolding in the hearts and minds of those courageous enough to listen. In a world increasingly obsessed with certainty and control, this was an intolerable idea. It threatened the monopoly of religious authorities who claimed exclusive access to sacred knowledge. So the story was recast as superstition, tucked away in the footnotes of theological debates, stripped of its power to inspire ordinary souls to see themselves as participants in the cosmic story. Yet even as institutions tightened their grip, Metatron's legend endured in the hidden corners of libraries and whispered teachings passed from mentor to student. It persisted because it resonated with a truth that no decree could extinguish, that there is something in humanity which hungers to transcend limitation, to pierce the illusion of separation between the earthly and the divine. When you explore why Metatron vanished from mainstream religion, you are also exploring the tension between conformity and authenticity. You are confronting the forces that have always tried to confine the infinite within neat doctrines, to domesticate wonder so it can be managed and marketed. But you were born for something greater than passive consumption of second-hand beliefs. You were born to stand in awe, to feel the vastness of existence unmediated by any authority. And if you feel a quickening in your spirit as you hear these words, that is your birthright calling you home. The truth is that Metatron became a threat precisely because he represented the possibility that any human could ascend to a higher state. That any life, no matter how obscure, carried the seed of transformation. This is the message that was deemed too dangerous to survive unchallenged, that you are more powerful than you know, that your consciousness can expand beyond the small stories you have been told to accept. Ask yourself what it means that centuries of scholars and priests conspired, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes deliberately, to erase this figure from the center of our collective imagination. It means that there is something in this story that can liberate you if you are willing to reclaim it. Metatron's erasure is not only a historical curiosity, it is a mirror reflecting the way societies try to diminish anything that empowers individuals to claim their spiritual sovereignty. But here, in this moment, you have chosen to look into that mirror without flinching. You have decided that you will not be satisfied with a sanitized version of history designed to keep you tame. You are here because your soul longs for the unfiltered truth, however inconvenient or unsettling it may be. And in that longing, you will discover a reservoir of courage that will astonish you. When you study the legends of Metatron, you find not only the image of a celestial scribe but the archetype of the transformed human, the testimony that no destiny is fixed. He is a symbol of becoming, of transcending limitation through devotion and clarity. His erasure was never about protecting faith from error, it was about protecting institutions from the uncontrollable power of awakened individuals. For when you awaken, you no longer need intermediaries to dictate your path. You become a force of renewal in your own right. That is why his name had to be hidden, why his stories had to be classified as esoteric, reserved for scholars in dimly lit archives. But no suppression is ever final. You are living proof that buried truths find their way to the surface when the time is ripe. And that time is now. The rediscovery of Metatron invites you to ask deeper questions about every tradition you have inherited. It urges you to consider how many other stories were quietly removed because they empowered people rather than subjugated them. It inspires you to recognize that the capacity to connect with the divine is woven into your being. No creed, no institution, no hierarchy can revoke it. You were born with the right to experience the sacred for yourself. To taste it, to embody it, to let it reshape your life from the inside out. Metatron is not merely a figure of ancient myth, he is a reminder of what humanity can become when we refuse to be defined by fear and limitation. He is the spark that reveals the vast possibilities latent within your consciousness. And every time you dare to speak his name, you participate in a quiet revolution that reclaims what was never truly lost. Look around you at the world we have inherited, a world often dominated by cynicism, superficial distractions, and a relentless pressure to conform. Ask yourself whether this is all you were meant to experience. Ask yourself whether the fire that glows in your heart was placed there only to be extinguished by routine. I say to you that it was not. I say to you that your longing for a deeper, richer, more luminous life is the most trustworthy guide you will ever have. When you explore the story of Metatron, you are giving yourself permission to remember the forgotten dimensions of reality. You are stepping beyond the borders drawn by those who fear the uncontrollable power of awakened human beings. And in doing so, you become part of an unbroken lineage of seekers who have always known that the divine is far more intimate and far more accessible than any dogma admits. Let this moment be a declaration. Let it be the instant you decide that you will never again settle for partial truths. Let it be the hour you commit to excavating every hidden story, every suppressed teaching, until you have reclaimed the fullness of your inheritance. The erasure of Metatron was an attempt to shrink your imagination, to convince you that transcendence was reserved for a chosen few. But you are here to prove that no one can extinguish the innate brilliance that lives within you. You are here to demonstrate that your spirit cannot be diminished by centuries of silence. In reclaiming Metatron's memory, you are reclaiming your own. And in that reclamation, you will find a strength that no external authority can grant or revoke. This is why the story matters. This is why it refuses to die. Because it speaks to the part of you that knows you were born for more than survival. You were born for wonder. You were born for transformation. You were born to become an instrument of a truth too vast to be confined by any institution. When you honor that knowing, you are not merely studying history, you are living it. You are bringing it back to life with every breath, every question, every act of courage. And nothing can stop you.